Okay. Deanna, are we ready?
I believe we are. You can see my
Okay.
screen. So,
I can we can see your screen. Go ahead and kick us off.
all right. Well, welcome everyone to the very first Retail Program Managers Network call of 2024. We have a really exciting speaker today, but before we turn it over to our friend and partner at the FDA, Mike Norders, we're going to hear a little bit from Steve about some of the upcoming training opportunities that we have for you here at APDO. And so thank you all for taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. Great to see you all. Happy 2024. It's hard to believe we're at 2024. And even more so, it's hard to believe I'm writing things about 2025 and 2026 right now. That is, I don't know, in my head, it just doesn't even seem possible we're at that point, but we are. Well, a couple of things we just wanted to talk to you all a little bit about. Once again, remind you the annual educational conference is coming up June 9th through the 12th in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Of course, as you all know, there is an amazing retail track for the conference. We can give you a little more idea of what is coming today, and I'll just hit on a couple things that are going to be of interest to you all. Let's go to the next slide quick, Deanna. First, for the first time, we are going to have a program manager session on the morning of Sunday, June 9th, from 8 until noon, really for retail program managers. To be an opportunity to discuss things that are important to you. There will be an invite letter that's coming out to you probably later this week with a survey monkey asking for topics of importance that you'd like to discuss. And it's a closed door session really so that the retail program leaders can have a discussion at the state level of what's important to them and really have to, I suspect we'll talk about several things. I would bet something on all of your radar screen is asset plan approvals. That seems to be something that's been hitting us when we look at and we talk to you all. That's a regular topic. So that might be one of the things we talk a little bit about is how can we streamline that process and make it less of a pain point for many of our programs. So that just might be one idea that makes that list of agenda topics. But we're very excited about this. This is something that I've been hearing from many of you for years, that you'd love an opportunity to come together and have a conversation with your colleagues and learn from each other in a small group safe setting. So this is really what we're doing there. Food truck has great, the retail food truck has really cool things coming on it. Of course, we do have the technology session continuing. I can tell you, I talked to some of the folks that we're looking at bringing in this week, and I saw some things I didn't ever think I would see in my life, including I did a fair amount of looking at a 3D food printer, which was fascinating to me, at least, and a very interesting topic. So we're working our way through those right now to make some final choices of what we can bring in. But I think we're going to see some great things there. A panel discussion on industry and communications with industry and how to work and collaborate better with our industry partners. Cultural foods and improved source, a very important topic. Learning more from what we learned from all of you in our state survey or state interviews that you all participated in. And lastly, lots of information on foodborne illness outbreaks and far more. Also, depending on your interests in some of the other tracks, there will be some courses, some items that you might be interested in. I'll just give you some hints on some of the things that are coming in some of the other tracks. Including a whole session on artificial intelligence, a session on data visualization, which is a common topic amongst all of you. And I know I've heard from many of you that it's something you're all working on. So another thing that you might be interested in, along with food safety culture. We're going to be having an interesting conversation with leaders across the whole sector in food safety, talking with them about how food safety culture is articulated and led in their various organizations. We're also going to have a session on traceability and several other topics I just wanted to hit on. So there's lots of great information for everyone. Go to the next slide, please. There are two things that we also wanted to mention, in addition, that there still are opportunities to get into the FD 215 and 218 courses. There are still seats available for March. I'm going to give you my perennial lecture that I will always give you. If we don't fill the seats, we don't get them back next year. So if you have anyone that needs to get into those courses, now is the time to do it. So get people registered, or else, I'm really not joking. The level of participation for this year directly reflects the number of courses we get in the retail food program next year. So definitely we want to get those filled. I will note February 10th, and today is the 6th. There are 4 more days. If those slots are not, there are not more students in that course within the next 4 days, that course will be canceled. Just so you know, that's currently what we're being told, along with mini course, of course, 218, later in April is at a low number of seats currently utilized. So definitely, if you need those courses, now is the time to get into them. There are seats available, and I will say Charlotte is an easy place to get to and a relatively low cost city. So not really hard because, as you know, it's a hub airport for one of the major airlines, and pretty much everyone flies there. So sorry, I'll stop my promo on FD 218 and 215. Let's move on to the next slide. Just want to note there is one more root cause analysis course available in this half of 2024, and that's February 20th through the 23rd. You're at basically nearing the deadline for registration for that, but go ahead and take a look. For those of you that haven't put someone through that course, it is a great opportunity to learn those key skills and really working toward long-term correction, risk-based inspections, and really, lastly, interventions or foodborne outbreak investigations. So, this is not just an outbreak tool. This is a tool that you should be using in your everyday to help your establishments really move to that next step of moving to the long-term correction, finding the true source of why things are happening, and avoiding, using near misses as an opportunity for learning and correction. So I'll stop on root cause analysis and move on to the next slide. Also, basic inspections and investigations course for new regulators is going to be May 13th through the 16th, a virtual course. This is a 20-hour course limited to 18 seats. So this is really for the very new inspectors. It's hands-on. You might ask, how are you going to do hands-on things like teaching sampling? We do it. So it's a great opportunity to see how you might do some of those things via electronic means. I will note that the last class was full, and I suspect this one will be also. So if you do have interest in that, or have some new folks coming on board and need assistance, this is a great opportunity. Moving on to the next slide. Instructor skills training, just one last time, that is going to be the 20th to the 22nd in Franklin, Tennessee. I have had several folks tell me that this has been one of the most valuable training courses they've ever taken. And I have to say, on a personal level, it really changed how I think about communicating information and how I teach. So I would say it's something that's very, very worth your time and energy for folks. Once again, this is not just for those folks that are training officers and field trainers. Every one of your staff is a trainer and teacher every day they're in the field. This helps them be better, helps them look to see what is resonating with the people in front of us. What technique do I need to use with this person? Am I getting my message across? So all of those things that you want to do to be effective really helps empower them to become much better in their work, whether at a field level, training level, or leadership level. Okay, moving on. And lastly, don't forget the 14th, 21st, and 22nd of this month is Advanced Inspector Boot Camp. If you haven't, if your folks that have previously taken boot camp haven't registered, now is a great time. You can see the topics are pretty exciting, including understanding food safety plans, how to identify special processes, recognizing and shaping food safety culture, along with many, many other things. Material is repeated each year for the new audience, but each of the 3 days does offer something new. So in other words, some of it is repeat material, some of it is new material, but each day does have portions that are new. Once again, these are this session is without cost and does come with continuing education credits. So moving on, the last thing just to note, we are going to be announcing some environmental sampling courses here in the next couple weeks. It looks like there's going to be a series in April. So very excited about that. Heads up, if you're interested, there will be some seats available for those that are looking for just a few seats. But we do want definitely let us know if you might be interested in those few seats, because it'll probably be something like under 15 or 20 of the 96 seats will be available to those outside the region we're in. So if you need them, let us know. Moving on. Lastly, but definitely not least, and if I remember right, this is the last item on my list. All of your agencies should have received the newly published guidance for developing HACCP plans for specialized processes at retail. We're going to have a special session on that via webinar on March 1st at noon Eastern, just talking about how to use it and how the guide works, along with the online tools that are also associated with it. So I hope you all can join us for that. I think it's a great opportunity. Of course, share it with your relevant staff that are working in the HACCP plan areas also, but we're very excited by this. And as you know, this is something that really came from what we would call the grassroots level, folks saying we need to do something different here. We need more resources. We need to do this better. And then really taking the charge and coming together with us and some researchers, et cetera, to put together a more complete guide that can really help them in the field. So moving on. At this point, one last thing, sorry, I forgot about this. So one of the questions and one of the things that we've learned through the state survey and state interviews was that often many of our leaders in programs haven't been through a regulatory adoption before. In other words, they haven't had to adopt a food code via regulation through either your regulatory process, your administrative rule process, whatever your state calls it. And frankly, it was a bit foreign to them. So this is going to be an opportunity to talk through the basics of what I like to call Administrative Law 101 and kind of how the regulatory adoption process works, show you some tools that are available for when you're doing that, and then talk to you a little bit more about things you need to be aware of when you're going through this work, along with giving you even some tools that for your use at the state level, including some state-specific resources. So with that, I think I turn it back over to Deanna at this slide. Deanna.
Yes. Thank you, Steve. I know that's a mouthful. We have a ton of stuff going on and we don't want you to miss it. So thank you for listening through those highlights. So next are basically the big presentation today. It is our retail risk factor survey from the FDA. Mike Nordos has put together a fantastic presentation. I think you're really going to enjoy this. And I think we all know Mike, but just as a quick reminder, retail food specialist in branch 2 with the US FDA. And with that, Mike, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Deanna. Oh, let me grab the screen here and we'll get off and running. All right. And just for the record, I can no longer see anything except for the presentation. So Dan, if anyone has a question or you need something, just feel free to interrupt me or I'll cover them at the end.
Sounds
it's
good.
A plus. Yeah, it's a plus though, because I can't see myself either. One of the things I hate about Zoom is when you have that picture of yourself back at you, but everything's gone, so that's good. Anyways, thanks for the introduction. I am a retail food specialist with the Food and Drug Administration. I think everyone's probably aware that every state has a specialist assigned to them. So if you don't know who yours is, you can contact me or you can go online and look and find them. They're a wealth of resources and information. I am assigned to the great states of Iowa and Wisconsin. So that's who I work with generally. In addition to that, we have lots of other things that we do. One of the things that I do is I actually lead the risk factor study. It's a work group. So my duties are in charge of setting up the study and doing the QA and running it and working with CIFSAN on the data and writing these reports and presentations. So hopefully I should be able to answer any questions we have at the end. One thing I'll say is, as we do this, the presentation today, it's not all about what we're finding. What I really hope as managers that you take out of this is the value in conducting your own risk factor study. The FDA has put together in association with the collaborative, lots of materials to get you started on how to do your own data collection. whether you're using inspectional data or doing a full-blown data collection like we're doing. We have all kinds of resources and tools to help you out. So I hope you see the value in the information I present today, and it motivates you to look into doing it for yourself. And I'll get into some of the reasons in a little bit. So in today's presentation, I'm talking about the results from our 2017-18 restaurant data collection. Now that seems like that's a while ago, but this is the most recent data we have. We're currently cleaning up data on our 2019 to 2022. Kind of funny because it got cut right in the middle of COVID. So we have one of the only studies where we're going to have before COVID and after COVID data. So we're working on cleaning up that data right now. And we'll have that out hopefully next year, and another presentation ready to go. And then we're collecting data for the final one right now. So we're always doing something with these studies. So today is the 2017-18, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means when I say that in a couple slides. Just some quick background on the study. Oh, and my clock went away too, so let me grab this to make sure I stay on time. This is actually our second 10-year study. So the FDA has been grouping our studies into 10-year increments. And this is our second one. Our first one ran from 1998 to 2008. And that can be found on our website. And we used a lot of the lessons learned from that one to improve this second one. And I'll talk about and highlight some of those lessons that we learned as we move forward, so that you're aware of those in case you want to set up your own study. You'll kind of know why we do things the way we do things. So in 2013, we started our second 10-year study. Now you're going to say, well, wait, we're in 2024, so it's not really a 10-year study anymore. And you would be right. COVID has set us back just like everybody else. So we are now looking at ending somewhere around 2026 or 2027. We'll see. I'll show you some slides coming up and explain why it really doesn't matter if we go over the 10 years or not, as long as we get enough data points to make a correlation. So let's talk real quick about the background of our study. So we're actually conducting 3 separate studies simultaneously. We call it a 10-year study, but the way we break it up into industry segments is we're doing 3 studies. So we're doing full service restaurants, fast food restaurants, and retail food store delis. So that's what all those 3 industry segments each receive their own report. So we get separate data on all of those studies. So what we're presenting today is data from the restaurant industry segment, full service and fast food restaurants. So today we'll cover 2 separate studies within this 10-year study. So you'll be hearing data from 2 of those 3 industry segments today. Some of the objectives of the study. The FDA is practicing what we preach. So we want everyone to do your own data collection because it should really be what drives your program, right? It's showing the impact that you're having on public health within your community because it's setting a baseline and then it's establishing trends over a certain time period so that you're hopefully seeing the occurrence of risk factors going down. That's what we want to be seeing. So you should use this to implement intervention strategies and things that you want to do to target certain risk factors that have a higher occurrence within your jurisdiction and see if you can make an impact on those and have it go down. So that's exactly what we're doing at the FDA. So the objectives of our study is just to identify the least and most often occurring risk factors and food safety behaviors. And I'll explain what the risk factors and food safety behaviors are in a little bit. So we're simply just measuring how many times we see these things happening. We want to determine the extent to which a food safety management system and certified food protection manager impact the occurrence of risk factors. So this is something we didn't do in our first study that we've done in our second study that is really valuable. And we have some resources to help you guys make these correlations and use all the same software and run the same reports that we run to get the data that I'm going to show you today. So anyways, what it's doing in a nutshell is we've developed the study to make correlations between active managerial control and presence of a certified food protection manager and the impact on food safety. So that's some interesting things. So what are we using this for? I spoke a little bit about intent already. So what we're using this is to drive our entire retail food program at the FDA. This is our main metric. We used to look at just solely who adopted the food code, but we've really shifted gears to using the data we obtain from this to highlight everything we do. So this is what is setting our work plan priorities. We're using it to inform how we're going to allocate all of our resources to enhance food safety nationwide. We're using these because what we're looking at the data is if we're not seeing the data go get better and some of the risk factors go down, then we're like, well, hey, maybe the messages or the training or all these things that we're doing aren't having the effect that we need them to. So we're really using this to develop all of our retail food safety initiatives, our policies, our targeted intervention strategies, and everything we do to control foodborne illness. One of the things that people always ask is, well, you collect all this data, what do you do with it? So we've really gotten better and we've come up with some new innovative ideas and communication and outreach and education programs. So we have just started to release some of these tools, but we've got more to come. And I will go over all of those at the end of today's presentation so that you know what's available to you as help. All right, so the table here is showing the summary of kind of how we collect the data and how it's broken out. Now there's more to it. This is very simplified because what I said is we're really doing three separate studies all at the same time. So though you see spaces between the 13 and 17 and 23 starting period, we're always doing something at the same time. So what I mean by that is in 2013 to 2014, we did our initial baseline data collection. So that's the first data collection period for the full service and fast food industry segments, which I'm going to be presenting today. So today's data is only what you see there, the second data collection period, which is 2017 to 18. Okay, that's the single standalone period that you're seeing now. And we're currently in the field. So some of you may have been contacted by specialists already. We're currently collecting our third data collection period. So when we analyze data, we always analyze data per period independently, okay? But then when we're done with that third data collection period, we will also come out with a trend analysis and compare that to what we saw in our first baseline measurement in 2013-14. And that's where it doesn't really matter that we've extended it out a little past 10 years because we're still looking at it individually as its snapshot for that 1 year, but comparing it over a trend in time. And our biostatisticians have told us that you need those 3 data collection periods. And as long as you get those 3 and they're spaced out, you can do a trend analysis that will has statistical significance. So in 2013-14, we collected our initial data. Then what we do is we spent 2014-15 cleaning up that data. Then in 2015 and 16, we turned it over to CFSAN to write the report. Meanwhile, we were collecting at that time retail food store deli data. So that's what we're doing in the interim between these segments you see here. Then we start cleaning up that data, hand it over to CFSAN, and we're out collecting the second set of data. So it's always training to do the data collection, doing the data collection, cleaning up the data, getting ready to do the next one. It's always kind of that 3-step cycle that we're doing. And again, we have materials that can help you all set up a similar process if you're interested in it. Information on facility type, risk, and sample size for this particular study. So when we say full service and fast food, we're breaking up the restaurant industry into these 2 subsegments. So the way we define those is a restaurant is what you think of a full service restaurant where you're going to go in, you're probably sitting at a table, you probably have wait staff that are going to take your order, bring your food to you, you receive and pay your bill through them at the table. So that's generally what you're thinking of as a full service restaurant. And the fast food is really more simply defined as not a full service restaurant, not a deli, right? But the way that we can think of this in a better defined term is that this would be kind of the fast food places where you usually, places where I always bring my dates, right? Where I make sure I carry their tray for them, be a real gentleman by doing that. But you go up, you place your order at a kiosk or a counter, and you either carry your tray to the table, or it's okay if someone brings your food to you. Sometimes that happens. But the key is that you're placing your own order and then having your food brought to you at the table or bringing it yourself to the table, and the transaction is done up front. So kind of the breakdown of how we do that. As far as risk category, I get a lot of questions on this. So we only look at risk categories 2 through 4. We do not include risk category 1. And these are as defined in Annex 5 of the Food Code. We use the exact same risk categories parameters as defined in the annexes, table 1 there of Annex 5. The reason we exclude 1 is because they're just not doing enough food preparation for us to sample or make the observations on what we want to see. So we want to see the more complex preparation activities. We want to see cooking and cooling and reheating. We have to be in these restaurants while they're doing that so that we can make observations. If we don't make observations, then I'm going to talk a bit about statistical significance. Even though we have a high number of restaurants we're in, we don't have a high enough number of observations to draw a conclusion that holds validity that we want. So because of that, we eliminate risk category number 1 because they just don't do enough food prep and we wouldn't see what we want to see. So let's talk a little bit about confidence level. Our CIFSAN biostatistician and their branch has told us that what we need is 384 data collections, so 340 establishments, 384 fast food, 384 full service. So each study needs 384 and able for us to achieve the confidence level we want. And what we're going for is a 95% confidence level that what we're seeing is within plus or minus 5 of what's actually occurring. So that's a very high level. If you're doing your own risk factor study, you necessarily don't need to be in that plus or minus 5 within 95%. You could drop it down to a few less, be at 80, 85%, and that's just fine. But we wanted to have a high confidence level. So we are within 95% confident that, again, what we're finding and what I'm presenting to you today is 90 to 100%, another way of saying it, of what is occurring. So for today's data, we have 430 full service and 421 fast food. The reason those numbers are different is we don't want to ever fall short. So we always try and collect more data than what we need in case we have staff quit or someone doesn't finish their work or someone gets promoted. There's always reasons that people and things happen, right? COVID happens and you don't finish what you had intended on. So we always shoot for around 435 to 440 is our number we look at. As long as we're above 384, we're good. Anything above that 384 doesn't really change the confidence level very much at all. So even at 430, we're not even a bump up to 96, but it's so that's not the intent of it. The intent is just to have that buffer. This is what our data collectors look like. And let me do a little explaining on this map. First, I want to talk about the data collectors. We use the number of data collectors that we have. So for this study, we were shorter staffed than normal. Let me read this real quick. Oh, I can answer. Let me answer that question for you at the end. And well, actually, I'll answer that question. I can answer that question right now. So the question is, if we're within 95% and this is a national study, why would you want to do your own study? Okay, well, there's a couple reasons on that. One is this study is not, though the data I'm presenting today is a picture of the United States, it's not intended to do a couple things. It cannot compare the United States regionally. You're all lumped together. Now, I'll tell you, when we do break down things regionally, we do obviously see some differences. You're going to do that, but we didn't want to do that for this study. So even regionally, you're going to see your own things that you are more pertinent local to you. I would guess they're going to mirror, because we've seen in industry segments that we're not reporting on that we don't do anymore, such as we used to do seafood departments and produce departments and schools and hospitals. The numbers were different, but the overall outcomes were the same, meaning the risk factors most out of compliance were the same, even though the numbers were different. So that can be true. The other thing we don't want to do is we can't compare one agency to another, and we can't compare, McDonald's to Burger King or facilities to this, and we don't even, well, it's just not meant to compare in that way. So that's number one. The other thing is you really want to see what the impact locally is of your intervention strategies, your enforcement policies, your training your outreach to community, all the things that you do, you want to see that impact locally at your own level. So that's why we would encourage you to do your own. And then I know the temptation is always to compare your studies to ours. So that's one. And the other reason is this is our last study. Probably last study until I retire, but we aren't going to do another 10-year study anytime soon. So we are working right now on what we're going to do to glean this data, and whether it's working with a collaborative or some other agencies. I don't know what's to come. Maybe sharing data with local agencies, and you guys will see. So thanks for that question. That was a good one. So anyways, 22 data collectors. So what we do to make sure is it doesn't matter who collects data where, because all our data collectors are the same. And what I mean by that is before you can collect data, all our specialists receive, even though we're already standardized, we cannot collect data if we're not already standardized by the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. So we are all the people that standardize you when we go out to your states who have been standardized by CFSAN. In addition to that, we all receive customized training specific to the study, the data protocol for the study, and the marking instructions for the study. In general, we use the same determinations we use in standardization. There are some things different, such as date marking and cooling, where we have a little bit different criteria for how we make decisions, just because we're pretty strict in standardization. For instance, for cooling for this, we will allow predictive modeling along with some other evidence as far as how we make decisions for evaluating that. So anyways, everyone's trained on that and standardized before we collect data. So we're all doing it the same as much as we can. We're interchangeable. Facility selection is one of the things I get a lot of questions on this. So we're doing this within a 150-mile radius of the specialist home location. So what we're very conscious of is we get accused of having this be, I can't, now my mind's going, I haven't been sleeping well lately, a convenience sample. We don't want it to seem like a convenient sample, right? So we're always trying to make sure that these circles encompass enough of the industry level we're trying to sample to be at somewhere around 60%. So I'm going to say that in a different way that makes sense. So it looks like a lot of the United States is not covered by our sample size in these circles, but it just so happens that our circles are covering the population centers for the most part in the United States, which is where the restaurants are located. So what you're looking at right now, 64% of all restaurants within each industry segment, roughly a little higher for, I think 65 for one, a little less for the other, but an average of 64% for the fast food and full service are eligible to be sampled because they fall within these circles. So as long as we're at that 60% or over, we feel pretty confident that it's a good reflection and not a convenient sample. For our future study right now, because people have moved around and aren't located in these exact areas, we had to bump that up to a 175-mile radius to maintain that same level of inclusion for establishments. Protocol and methodology. So the first thing is the state or local jurisdiction who has regulatory authority are always contacted prior to us conducting any of our data collections. We do this for a number of reasons. The first reason is we want to discuss with them to make sure that the facilities drawn within your jurisdiction meet the criteria. So the three reasons they would not meet the criteria is it's not a full service or fast food restaurant, so it's a deli or something else. So it's in the wrong industry segment. Sometimes the GIS database pulls it from the wrong industry segment. Two, it's not a risk category 2 through 4. If it's for some reason a risk category 1 or they don't do food, then we would select a random or an alternate establishment. And if they're under any type of legal enforcement action, so if this is already a facility that you brought the hammer down on and you might be straining your relationships with, we don't want to be in there. So we do exclude those as well. So we do that when we call. The other thing that we do is we ask them to go with us. So the regulatory authority, you don't have to go with us or staff go with us, but oftentimes, most of the time, our jurisdictions are sending, whether it be a state or local, sending people with us because it's a great way, one, to learn how we do it. And it's an extra opportunity for us at the FDA to work with people at the local level so they can see what we do and how we do a data collection. And it's very similar to a standardized inspection. So it's a great opportunity to work together. Let me make sure I covered everything I wanted to talk to about that. Yeah, all right, so you can come with us or you don't have to. It's up to you, as well as a note that these are non-regulatory data collections. So when we go out, they are unannounced because we want to see what happens when they don't know we're coming. But it's a non-regulatory visit as well. So it's supposed to be non-threatening. We just want to see what's out there and we want an honest conversation with the operators. So when we go out there, we do introduce ourselves. We give them an introductory letter that explains the purpose of the study and how the data is used. Everything is kept secret. So we do not share. I don't even have it. We don't share what establishments we're in, who we talk to. And that's why we can't analyze the data per establishment or per person. That information is all taken off of the report when it's sent in. And their participation is voluntary. So if someone from industry says we're busy or we're unsure, we just don't want to participate, then we just thank them and leave and draw a substitute. I can tell you that almost never happens. Industry, especially when they don't know when we're coming to a particular establishment, but a lot of times they've heard that we're out and about, especially the chains and franchises know when we're doing this now that it's we've been doing this for a few years. And they a lot of times are excited to have us in there because it's kind of a free audit and free time to work with them as well. So there is a lot of data we collect that we haven't reported out on yet. So if you receive a call because you're in one of these areas where a specialist has one of your jurisdictions and we're working with you on that, we will ask you questions about whether or not you're enrolled in the program standards, how you report out inspection results, what your specific laws are within your jurisdiction for a certified food protection manager, and things like that. We have looked for correlations on some of that, and a lot of times we don't find anything significant, so we don't report out. Sometimes we do, and we just haven't reported out on it yet. So we do have all that information available that I'm not reporting out on today, and I'll show you how to get that if you're interested in looking at some of the results, full results of the study that goes into deeper than what I've talked about today. All right, now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of it. Our entire study is centered around the 5 CDC foodborne illness risk factors. Now, you may say to yourself, if you're not sleeping, well, I only see 4 of the risk factors up there, and you would be right. Source is missing. It's not missing from our study. It's just missing from the data we're presenting today. It's not included in our 10 primary data items, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But the reason we excluded it is a lesson learned from that first study I told you about, is that it had an extremely high in-compliance percentage, so we weren't going to focus intervention strategies or collection on that. It is still part of the data we're collecting. I think it's like data item 14 or 17. It's been a while since I've looked at the sheets. I should know that. But we're still collecting it. We're just not reporting out on it. We're focusing on these top 4. So again, these foodborne illness risk factors that you see on the left side are those factors. They're really the behaviors that contribute to foodborne illness. Now, we are breaking down this study. This is another very important thing we learned from our first 10-year study. In our first 10-year study, we had way too many data items that we were looking at. And sometimes we couldn't, because of that, collect enough data or make enough observations to make a statistical analysis that was accurate on each data item. So you can't have too many. But we didn't want to lose the capability to do that for the ones that where you do collect that much information, okay? So we broke it down into 3 levels of analysis, and you're seeing 2 here, and the next slide will show you the 3rd. So the way it works is, if you see the first thing here is foodborne illness risk factors. We have our 4 risk factor categories. We break that down further into what we call the data items. And the data items are what I'm going to talk to you about today. So when I present the data, it's all going to be on these data items, the primary 10. They're associated directly to these risk factors. And you can see that each risk factor has 2 or more data items associated with it. So here's an example of the reason we do this way. If you look at the poor personal hygiene risk factor and we only reported out on that, you would miss some of what we're going to see later, which is that employees practicing proper hand washing, data item number 1, has a higher out of compliance percentage. Whereas data item 2, employees not contacting bare hand or no bare hand contact with ready to eat foods, has an extremely high in compliance. So those two kind of weigh each other out. So if we just looked at the poor personal hygiene risk factor category, it wouldn't give us that the data specific that we want to see. It's still good to take a look at it per risk factor, but being that one is most in compliance, one is most out of compliance, they would kind of balance each other out. So that's why we are breaking it down to that data item level for the study. So how do we make a determination on data items? So this is where we go to our third level of analysis, which we can look at, but I'm not going to report out on today. And that is information statements. So each of the data items are that second level. So that, again, the data items are associated with the risk factors. Each of those 1 through 10 data items has a series of information statements that go along with them. And those information statements are used to make an overall in, out, not observed, not applicable determination for the overall data item. And there are a set of rules, and they just blew my power. So hopefully I won't lose it here. My power went off. Okay, so always something happens during these, right? So the in order for something to be in, and this is important to understand for when I go over how we make the determinations of the actual numbers that I'm going to go over, in order for a data item to be in, every single one of the information statements have to be in. Okay, if any one data item is out, it kind of trumps everything. Even if, so if 9A, B, and C are all in, but D is out, the overall data item is out, okay? Because we're analyzing it at the data item level, okay? So there's a set of rules on how to mark that. Again, the reason we do that is if in the first collection, the information statements, that was the level we did our data collection on. So we had 46 information statements. And what happened was, like roasts, we didn't see people cooking roasts. It was maybe only 2.5 to 5% of the time that we're in an establishment where they do cook roast, and they were actually doing it at the time we're there, right? Because that's the not observed, not applicable. A lot of places don't even cook roasts. And if they do cook roast, they might not be doing it when we happen to be in there. So we just didn't have a lot of information to make a determination on how roasts are cooked all by themselves, okay? But we might for things like eggs and hamburgers or chicken fingers and some of these other cooking parameters. So for some of these, we can make a determination, but not for all of them. So that's why we're reporting out on this the way we are. And then I'll make one final note on this is we worked with the National Restaurant Association and industry to retool the way that these are worded. So in our first study, the information statements were just code specific, and that did two things. One, it was more confusing because it sounded legal, and two, it was very negative. It said, you know, improper cooking of, and it was like you didn't do this right. So they turned it around to be a positive statement. It still matches all of our food code parameters for cooking. You'll see that all of our temperatures here are exactly what's in the food code. We just changed the language to be a more positive thing, saying that they are doing this right, right? So we made that small change. Okay, some people just want to know the results first, so I'll give that to you right now. Hopefully you'll pay attention for the rest of it after this, so we'll see how it's going. But the bottom line up front is, in the information from this, we found that establishments have the best control of no bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods, and raw animal foods are cooked to required temps. No bare hand contact came into rule halfway through our first study. And it was amazing the compliance improvement percentage we saw with that when we saw that get implemented. So it wasn't necessarily there for the first study, but the cooking was as well. So there also was a high in compliance for cooking in that first study, and the second study is mirroring that so far. We'll see what happens when we're post-COVID here with our third and final data collection that we're doing now, data collection period. We need better control over employee hand washing, cold holding, and cooling foods properly. And I'll show you exactly in which order and how that works coming up. This is a key takeaway. Remember I talked about, we designed this to make some correlations. We saw correlations, right? Food safety management systems, so we're talking active managerial control, is the strongest predictor of items being out of compliance or the compliance level. And when I show you this, it's really going to be an aha moment. It should blow everybody's mind. I guess you shouldn't be surprised, but the data is more stark than I had expected to see. And certified food protection manager and the presence and level thereof obviously is going to enhance the food safety management systems. We're going to look a little bit about just how well it enhances them. And at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about norovirus and what we're doing to use the data we're collecting from this to target that for our intervention strategies and why we targeted that. So let's talk. We're going to have two studies. Let's talk about fast food first, and then I'll go into the full service. Full service is going to be a little faster because I'll go over the results and won't have to explain as much over how to read the results as I do for the fast food. So starting again for the fast food restaurants, let's talk about risk categories. So this is how they fell into for those 421 establishments that were in the fast food. We had 80% risk category 2 and about 20% in risk category 3. This is nothing to be surprised. This is what we would expect because a lot of our fast food are doing cook serve, right? They're not doing a lot of the cooling or reheating, which would kick you into risk category 3, and they're not doing special processes. So we didn't see any that had a risk category 4. And just a quick reminder that there was no risk category 1 because we're not collecting data on those establishments that don't do those food safety behaviors that we want to see. So we're also analyzing the effects of how an establishment, whether it being multi-unit or not multi-unit, affects on some of the results we're seeing. So what we're doing is we're analyzing the data, items being out of compliance based on a facility's status as either being a single unit, and a single unit would mean what we think of as ma and pa, so a single owner type place. So they just have the one establishment versus a franchise or corporation is which we call a multi-unit. So among fast food restaurants, we saw about 74%, 74.82, so 75% were multi-unit operations and 25% were single unit or ma and pa. Now this is key. This seems like there's not a whole lot on this slide, but when I present this for this and the full service, keep these numbers in mind because I'm going to drive home a point with this later, because this is going to not only target what we need to look at for interventions, but who we need to target these interventions at. So keep these numbers in mind for a couple slides when we talk about food safety management systems. Okay, so there's a lot on this slide, but let me break it down in a way that's pretty easy to digest here. So this is the formula we use to calculate the results that I'm going to show to you. So simply stated, a percent out of compliance, we look at the total number out of compliance. So remember I showed you our form for the data items that had in, out, not observed, not applicable. You throw out the not applicable, not observed. You take the total number of in and out and either the total number of in or the total number of out, depending on which one you want to see. So on the top, if you want to find out your out of compliance percentage, you put out. If you want to find the in, you find the in. So we'll be talking about out today. So out is on in the numerator, and the denominator at the bottom is the total of in and out. So the total out divided by the total in and out times 100 will give you a percent. Now, this took some explaining to do after our first couple rounds. And so I want to make sure people understand this, especially if we're communicating these results to industry. Very, very important to understand that the data we're reporting today in this presentation is a proportion and not a rate, okay? So what does that mean? It means that if any of the data I show you today says 80% out of compliance, so the example you see is for proper cooling of foods, all that means is that in the establishments who do cooling, and we're doing cooling at the time we're in there, at least one was doing it in a way that was out of compliance. Okay, so it's not saying that the industry is doing this wrong 80% of the time. That would be not the correct way to think of this. All it's saying, if 80% is out of compliance, is that in 8 out of 10 establishments where you were cooling foods, 8 out of 10, 8 were cooling them improperly at the time. So I kind of befuddled that a little bit, so I'll say it in a more clear way. If you go to an establishment and you're observing them cool 10 things, and they cool 9 of those things properly, and 1 thing they missed, it's out, right? So they're actually doing cooling right 90% of the time. But for our data collection, that establishment is considered out because we observed it 1 time out, okay? So then you put all the establishments together, and an 80% would mean at 8 of them, we found at least 1 thing out, okay? So that's how you read this. Why do we do it that way? It's very, very important. The reason we do it this way is because we have to compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And we don't want people to say, well, obviously you observe cooling more often than you receive cold holding more often than cooling, right? You're going to see cold holding at every single establishment you're in. You might not see cooling at all. So you're going to see more out of compliance because you're making more observations of the one. And we have to even it out by saying, nope, it's just for the places where you see it and it was just done wrong once, regardless of how many times they do it in that establishment. So that's the reason we do it that way, is it really evens it out so that we can see, regardless of which is done more often, which is done correctly the most. So hopefully that makes sense. And I didn't say that in a way that was more confusing than if I would have just left it alone and let you read the slide, right? Okay, so this is data items out of compliance for fast food. So across the bottom on the X, you see the data item number. So the 1 through 10 is just the 1 through 10 data items, and you'll see the key in the top right there is the data item that is associated with that. So remember, 1 and 2 were risk factor for poor personal hygiene, and then it goes so on. So, but we're reporting out on the data items 1 through 10. So the percentage on the left side out of compliance is the more means the more we're out of compliance. So the higher line here, the worst case scenario we have. So we will see the data items 5, which was cold holding, 7, which was cooling, and 1, which is hand washing, were found out of compliance the most often at 62, about 59%, and about 58.8%. So those were those things that we have the most opportunity to improve on, and we want to target some intervention strategies on. Establishments had best control over no bare hand contact, hot holding, and cooking of raw animal foods. So this suggests that while fast food restaurants are a little better at managing their bare hand contact with ready foods, cooking to required temperatures, there remains a need to gain better control over cold holding of TCS foods, cooling, and employee hand washing. And we'll talk about some of the things we're going to do at the end and how we can do that. And I will, again, make a note that there were lower number of cooling and reheating observations made compared to that of some of the others, but still significant enough to make a observation on because of the way we do the data. So rearranging it into those categories and doing it the way we did worked out. I'm going to shift gears a little bit to talk about, I spoke a little bit about making a correlation between Certified Food Protection Manager and food safety management systems. So how do you do that? The FDA overall at large is trying to nail down active managerial control and food safety management systems. And even the experts can't agree on everything that has to be in it and how to do a cookie cutter plan. So we said to ourselves, how are we going to evaluate this? It's important to evaluate it, but how can we do that? So we came up with 3 metrics that we think are a core component of every plan, meaning there's different ways to accomplish this, but there's 3 general areas that every food safety management system needs, and we can measure the implementation of those in a simple way. So what we did was we said they all need procedures, and simply some defined set of actions for accomplishing the task the way you want to do it. So depending on the risk category, there should be procedures for how they're handling no bare hand contact with ready to eat foods. How are you handling cooking temperatures? How are you handling cleaning and sanitizing? So we're going through and looking at their sets of procedures for each of those. Training is, how does management inform employees and communicate that? Well, you have the procedures, great. How do your employees know what the procedures are and how to accomplish them, right? So that's training. And the last one is monitoring. And that's the third step is, all right, we know that you have the procedures. We know that they've been trained. How are you monitoring to make sure they're doing it? Okay, so that's the final step. So we're just looking at those three criteria of a food safety management system. And we're giving them all a score. And the score receives a number score. So the 1 through 4 is actually a number that we're going to add. So for each of those data items, and for procedures, training, and monitoring, and I'm going to walk you through an example after this, each one receives a score. So non-existent would mean a score of 1 point, which means they have no system in place. Everything is kind of haphazard. There's no structure. They really haven't thought about food safety management systems at all and developed any active managerial control. Underdeveloped means that, yes, they've started to do this, but there's some major gaps in it. So we've talked with them. They're looking at active managerial control. Maybe they're even putting an effort into it and taking some temperatures or have something to do for hand contact. But we have identified some gaps where even if implemented, there's going to be some out of control risk factors because things aren't wholesome or included. Well-developed means that their system is complete and consistent. We really couldn't find any gaps. They have a very good food safety management system. And the only difference between that and the well-developed and documented is that they were able, under number 3, to answer all of our questions verbally. If they have something in writing, a training manual, a computer program, or some type of documentation, then it's well-developed and documented. And it's good to know that, because as I go through these slides, I'm going to point out a couple distinctions that actually show that in some areas we're doing better off than expected when you take those two together, because really the well-developed means, hey, you have a good food safety management system. So for a lot of this, I combine the well-developed and documented, because that's saying they're doing what they need to be doing. It's just one is written and one was verbal. So just remember that going forward. Here's an example of how we do that. And this example is for poor personal hygiene. If you remember, there were 2 data items under poor personal hygiene. So for each data item, we have procedures, training, and monitoring. And in this one, you can see the scores that they received there across that top box. Lots of 2s and a couple 3s. So the score is simply calculated by adding all of those scores together and dividing by the number, because it's going to be a different number for each. Because if you remember, some risk factors have up to 4 data items. So they're going to have more numbers to add. So in this one, we had 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 divided. So that's 15 is what it equals, divided by 6 equals 2.5. So it's the simple math down there in the bottom left that you can see. And what that does then is everyone gets 1 food safety management system score. So we combine all those scores together to give them an average number and use the rubric that you'll see in the bottom right that was just highlighted. And in this case, they received 2.5, which falls between 1 and 3. So we would call that underdeveloped. So we're looking at their whole system, because they might have, in this one, you can see they had some underdeveloped procedures, but they had really good training and really good monitoring, right? Well, so there are some gaps. You put it all together and we see overall it's underdeveloped. So that's how we come up with a score. And we'll look to see how food safety management system looked for fast food. So these are the results for our 421 fast food. What you should look at here is that when you take the underdeveloped, that 44.7, that looks pretty overwhelming and definitely says, yeah, we need to look at some food safety management systems and really building our capacity of these places to do this. But if you take the well-developed and documented and the well-developed and add those together, now we're getting to close to almost half of those as well. So we're doing a little better. Of course, you could take the non-existent and add those to the underdeveloped, and where they're looking at that and you say, well, now we're up around 70%. So lots of data here, depending on how you look at it. But the take home information here is that there's a huge opportunity to work with our industry on improving their actual food safety management systems. And you're going to see why in a little bit. What is not on this table? Remember a little bit ago, I said, remember the difference that we have in how many are mom and pop versus how many are corporations. So what's not on here, but I just know because I've done, I work with the study and I work with the data, is that 58% of multi-unit, so the corporations and the franchises had well-developed and documented food safety management systems, whereas only 6.8, so about 7% of the ma and pa had well-developed and documented. So that's stark. So what that is showing is that not even in these numbers where you're seeing just the number of undeveloped, but only 7% of the standalone facilities had the well-developed and documented. So the rest have major gaps in their food safety systems, right? They're either the non-existent or the underdeveloped, which means there's a gap in protecting public health there. And we're thinking that this is probably, we didn't look at antecedences here, but it's probably to do with the resources, right? Corporations and franchises probably have the money and resources and staffing to really target developing their own systems, whereas it might be more of a struggle for standalone units. So this is not only going to show us what we need to target our resources on, but who we need to target resources on. We really need to help the capacity of these places who don't have the deep pockets and the resources at a corporate or franchise level to develop some of these systems themselves. I found that to be very interesting, and it's more of a contrast for the next one I'm going to show you. So this is the average primary data items out of compliance by fast food. If I put you to sleep a little bit with data, you want to wake up now, because this one is a real eye-opening slide. So across the bottom, you're going to see the 4 categories of our food safety management systems, going from non-existent to well-developed and documented. Going across the top is out of data items out of compliance. So that's average numbers 0 through 10. So all of the data items. So if there are 10, they're all out, and 0 means none out. So we took the average, right? So if they had a non-existent food safety management system, they averaged 4.5 data items out of compliance. In contrast to that, if they had a well-developed and documented food safety management system, they're at 1.3. So that is more than half. So the take home that I want everyone to see here is that by working with these establishments and helping them develop these food safety management systems and controlling these risk factors themselves when we're not there, they're cutting their occurrence of risk factors more than half. So that's really where we need to be targeting our time and resources, and I hope and think that that's where the food code is going to go in the future. I mean, we have duties in the food code. One of the best things that ever got added to the food code, in my opinion, was duties. Because what is duties saying? Duties is saying, are you monitoring and managing active managerial control for these specific things? It's not everything, but we're getting there, right? And for those people in Iowa and Wisconsin, you knew when I do my standardization, that's why we look at this with your employees, because it's what's going to make an impact going home. So I probably said that too much, but just wanted to make sure you guys grasp that. So Certified Food Protection Manager. This one I'll go through real quick. So what this is each category is the level of presence of a certified food protection manager at the establishments that we're in. So what does none mean? None means there is no certified food protection manager, not even at the establishment. Nobody, they have nothing there. Employed means, so every one of these is going to build on the next. So employed would mean, yes, they have someone who is employed, but they're not there at the time of the inspection. Present means, yes, we have someone, they're employed, and they're present during the inspection, okay? But they're not the person in charge. And the last one is, and it's going through the different levels where we'll look at the code. The last one is, yep, we have a certified food protection manager, they're employed, they're here, and they're also the person in charge, okay? So what we had here is for certified food protection manager and percent of establishments observed is that we had only 19% didn't have a certified food protection manager employed at all. Whereas in contrast to that, 66.3% had a person in charge. So this might seem like there's not a lot of information on the slide, but the two take-home messages that I'll tell you here is one, the correlation between this that we saw is that places that have a certified food protection manager who was the person in charge were much more likely to have a well-developed and documented food safety management system than those that weren't or that had none. So what it's saying is that what we're doing in the food code is the right track, is that it is important to have a certified food protection manager who is actually at the facility, and that having them be the person in charge matters because they're going to have a much better chance of having a well-developed food safety management system, which we link the bridge then says, what we just saw in the last slide, gives them a much lower probability of having a lower, half the occurrence of risk factors. So we don't bridge the gap of certified food protection manager directly to the occurrence of risk factors. We make the link through the food safety management system. So they have a higher chance of having a food safety management system, which impacts risk factors. The other thing that is interesting from this slide is that it was interesting that 72% of the fast food restaurants in our study operated in a jurisdiction where a certified food protection manager was required, yet we saw that 66%, only 66% had them there and required at the time. So what does this tell us? This tells us that for some reason, we're seeing a gap between what the law is and the compliance rate is, because we have 72% said, yes, you have to be the person in charge, but we only are 66% there. I don't know what that means or the antecedents or the reason is. It's just saying that, hey, the percent isn't quite there to what we were seeing for the local law. So maybe academia or someone will pick up the study where we left off and see if they can figure out why that is. No, I'm getting close on time here, so I got to move a little faster. It's tough not having a clock. This is what we're showing here is the median primary data items of auto compliance risk factors across all data items. So this is really our take-home slide. We're using the median number because it's our best measure of where the middle of our data occurs. So what you'll see right now for fast food restaurants is that number is 3. Now, there's a lot of other information on this slide, and I'll be happy to share it with you all because we're short on time, and that tends to happen when I don't talk fast enough and I go off on tangents on all the cool stuff that you see. And I could talk for 10 minutes on this slide, but I promise you I won't. So some of the things I do want to draw your attention to is in that first column on the left, that's just the number of data items out of compliance, 0 through 10, and it's a total number, right? The next number over is the number of establishments that had that. So the good news here is 32 establishments had 0%, right? Or had 0 out of compliance, which was 7.6%. So just those 3 columns is looking at them individually. As well, no one had 9 or 10. So nobody had either 9 or 10 out of compliance. So that was good. When you look at the first column to the right of the percent sign, that's cumulative. So we're saying 32 had 0, then the 32 plus the 85 is 117. So that's where we fall there, had either 0 or 1. And then 199 had 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so it's a cumulative. So that's where we look at the cumulative percent on the far right at 67.7. Now, this is the number we're measuring, and the whole point that we're doing this risk factor study. We want to see when we do our next data collection period, we want to see that number move from 3 to 2, because that means what we're doing is working. We're making an impact in our community. Whatever our intervention strategies are successful. If it goes the other way, we got to figure out why. We know that when we get that cumulative percent to 50%, that line jumps up to 2. So at 47%, we're very close to moving the goalpost there, or to moving the number, I should say, not moving the goalpost, but to moving our being successful in achieving our goal of reducing those. Okay, let's look at full service, and this will go a little bit faster because you all already understand how to read the slides and how the data goes. So I'm just going to present the data and I don't have to explain it quite as much. So as described previously in the last slide, establishments eligible, remember, had to be categories 2 through 4, and this is simply where they fell. A little bit different than we saw. Remember, our fast food was the majority, were 2, and a big chunk were 3, and we didn't have any 4, right? So in this, it's again more what we would expect from full service, because they're doing more of that cook, cool, reheat. So more of those processes that kick you into that category 3. So we had almost 12% there that were 2. The majority were in category 3, and we did have a few that were doing special processes of some sort, would kick them into that risk category number 4. So this is for the 430, so a little bit larger sample size for full service. Multi-unit versus full service. Again, this really just the take home here is to remember this for when I present that food safety management systems, because again, I'll go over kind of which type of establishments are doing a little bit better job of having those systems in place. So for multiple units, in this one, we have the 64 versus 36. So more likely that they're going to be a chain versus 36%, which are smaller mom and pop. And again, I think the definition you should remember for that from our previous slide. All right. Data items out of compliance. So this is the same type of slide we're looking at as is fast food. What is really unique here is you'll see all the bars are at a higher level, right? So everything had a higher out of compliance level. So this is also kind of to that question asked earlier, why would we do this in our own area? Because you might see them, but you're going to see different numbers. So the lines are all higher, but the results are kind of the same. So we had the same 3: hand washing, cold holding, and cooling were the most out of compliant, although the rates were all quite a bit higher. And likewise, the same were in no bare hand contact, hot holding, and cooking were all the most in compliance percentage rates. So the take home message is kind of the same, is there's more of an opportunity to improve for those that you see in red, the hand washing, cold holding, and cooling, and they have better control over no bare hand contact, hot holding, and cooking. Now, having said this, when you're doing your own risk factor study, if you were to look at this and say, well, you don't necessarily have to target the highest out of 3 out of compliance, because you'll see that data item 8 there, date marking, also had a fairly high out of compliance percentage. So you could focus on that as well at the same time. However you want to do it, or even if you wanted to really drill home that no bare hand contact, because it goes with the risk factor, overall risk factor of poor personal hygiene, maybe you're going to look at no bare hand contact, employee illness, and hand washing. So you're going to target all those 3. Well, you can still target that and see how it's going to go down. Okay, so food safety management systems, again, I'm not going to go over it again. We use the same methodology for making that determination. 66% were underdeveloped. And if you look at the non-existent and underdeveloped, that number is way too large, right? We're well over 75% there. The well-developed and documented is 10. And if you put together the well-developed and documented is 2.6, and the well-developed is 10. So again, the only differences there is one is written, one isn't. So if you combine those two, we're still only at 12%, right? So there is a huge gap there. Again, what's not in the table, but I want to let you guys know that of the 28.3% of multi-unit establishments that have a well-developed or well-developed and documented, and that number is wrong because it's only the 12% there. So I'm not even going to read my notes. I'm just going to go off what I know. So I remember what this is. So for the non-existent and the underdeveloped, only 3.6% of those single unit establishments had the well-developed and documented. Okay, I had to think this through, so forgive me for that. I had to think it through for a second, because this is just information I know, and it was wrong in the notes here. So I'm going to say that again. So 3.6% of single unit or mom and pop establishments had well-developed and documented. Only 3.6%. So that is telling us that there's a huge food safety gap there, right? We really, again, and it was the same for fast food, but even more stark contrast for full service, when we're only having 3.5% of these mom and pops, and that's where I think my notes were. I think there were 28% of them were the mom and pops have a well-developed system. So not only showing us on the previous slide of what we need to target, but who we need to target. So let's look at that. The average primary data items out of compliance. Again, this is the average number. So for non-existent food safety management systems, 5.2. And for well-developed and documented, we had 2.8. So same thing we saw in the earlier data, the earlier industry segment for fast food. We're cutting more than half the occurrence of risk factors by having a well-developed and documented food safety management system. So it really shows you the impact that that can have on what we're seeing out in the field. Certified food protection manager. Again, same kind of story here. We're at 25.8% didn't have a certified food protection manager even employed at the establishment, and 56.5% did have one that was employed, present, and the person in charge. And again, we're at, I think I said 76% was the law. So it's, even though it's the law there, we're at that lower percentage of meeting that. So we're a little bit lower on that final slide here. So you remember we were at a median of 3 for our fast food. We're at 5. So our median out of compliance data items is 5 for full service restaurants. But again, there's good news. We had 0 that had all 10 out. Concerning that we had 5 that had 9. So 5 of the establishments had 9 data items that were all out of compliance. But we did have 8 that had 0, and you can see those numbers for yourself. Take them for what they are. But the good news here is, again, if you look over the medium number on the right, which is the cumulative, what I had said is 50% moves the bar, and we're at 49.07. So if we can nudge that up to 50%, we are going to drop it to 4. So that's good. 4 still seems like a lot, but hey, it's moving the bar in the right direction. So we would help see that. Post-COVID, I don't know if that's going to happen. I do know what the data says, but I can't tell you yet. You'll have to come back for my next presentation next year to see if we are successful in moving that bar, because we'll report out on some of that. So again, the key takeaways, I went over this at the beginning, so I'll just reiterate now that you've seen some of the data, is that no bare hand contact with the ready-to-eat foods and raw animal foods. They're doing a pretty good job of controlling those. That was the same in both industry segments, although there was slightly higher out of compliance rate for those in the full service than there was fast food. They were still the better complied with in both. Both industry segments needed better control over hand washing, cold holding, and cooling. Hopefully I've convinced you and shown you that food safety management systems were a very strong predictor. I said that in that first bottom line up front slide, but now you know the data behind it. You're cutting it in more than half. So huge impact that doing those food safety management systems has on cutting the occurrence of risk factors, and having our mom and pops are the ones who are struggling to implement those. So we really need to figure out a way to get them some assistance. Certified food protection manager enhances the level of food safety management system, much more likely to have a well-developed and documented system if you have a certified food protection manager who's present and the person in charge. And again, we're going to look at norovirus a little bit and the reason norovirus is on here is we looked at, well, what do we do? People, I said, you're doing these data collections, FDA, what are you doing with it? So we said, well, we're going to target norovirus. And I'm going to talk about some of the products and how we're doing that real quickly at the end here. So what I want to discuss shortly in the last 2 slides is that what we're reporting on is risk factors, data items, and findings. But what were the next steps? So our next steps were to develop some products, and we developed 3. One of the food safety behaviors and practices that you saw that was out of compliance was poor personal hygiene, right? Specifically hand washing. What's not reported in this data is some of the stuff that we're taking on employee illness. Not a huge in compliance rate for following food code parameters for employee illness either. If you're interested in all of that, you can see it in some of the next reports that I have coming up here. But we're targeting norovirus because we know that that's 50% of our outbreaks in our restaurants are norovirus related, and it's poor personal hygiene, which we saw had a high out of compliance. So we wanted to do some targeting of that. I said in one of the very first slides, why do you want to do a data collection? Well, you should do a data collection because you're seeing what the occurrence of risk factors is in your community, and you're doing something about it, and you're measuring to see if what you did is effective. Okay, so that's what we're doing at the FDA, is we're using these study results to target what we do. We have a new intervention strategies work group. We're working with CIFSAN to develop some of these materials, and we've come out with our first set, and there's more to come. So what we have for you is Food Safety Management System fact sheet, a call to action, and a top line summary report. The top line summary report. So this is developed as a means to provide more of the data which was not included in today's technical report. There is just way too much to go over. I realize I'm talking fast. It's not because I'm from Minnesota. It's because there is a lot to go over, even just going over the 10 primary data items. It's a lot of data. I know I'm throwing it at you fast. I hope I've done a decent job of explaining it, not over explaining, because I know some of those slides and the data, the first time you look at them are kind of hard to understand and say, what am I looking at here? So that's why I kind of slowed down for some of them. But if you're one of those people who like all the data, we have it for you. It's already published. You can go to our website, get this report. This has everything in it, including all of those questions we ask about where you're at with what your laws are you meeting the standards, temperature measurement tables and distribution tables. We actually take all the temperatures of everything we measured. You can see those distribution, and it's put together in a very accessible, easy to digest way, so anyone can understand it. So you don't need to be a statistician to understand the data. Take a look at that report, and you'll probably find a lot of interesting stuff in there. Our food safety management fact sheet. So this is a continuation document from our data collection. We first rolled this out after our 2013-14, and it was very well received by both industry and regulators. So we did it again for the 17-18 after we received that feedback that this was something that was useful to you all. So what it does is it explains food safety management systems, what they are, how they can impact food-borne illness risk factors, and what we found in our data collection. So this is a 2-page document. We always tried, 1 page would be better, is just too much information, because we've said, all right, we know food safety management systems are important. What are they? How can they be implemented? What can we do? So we have, we've developed this, and in correlation to that, we developed 2 calls to action for, one for industry, one for regulators. So the purpose of doing the data collection is to help target intervention strategies, and that's exactly what we did. We developed these calls of action for industry and regulators to help them understand what some actionable steps might be to reduce the occurrence of foodborne illness risk factors. So again, CIFSAN selected for this first one. There's going to be more to come. So this doesn't cover all the risk factors, but because of the norovirus problem, CIFSAN made the decision to go with poor personal hygiene as the first targeted intervention. And I know that you saw in some of them, there were other interventions which you saw, which had just as high or higher, occurrences, but they made the decision to target this one for norovirus concerns because 50% of outbreaks are associated with norovirus. So that's what they had. That's what we have here. So the call to industry is to help industry develop these, and regulators is for regulators. So I think I finished with 4 minutes to spare, which is a record. Hopefully I didn't go over full service too fast. I saw that I was getting long-winded, and I sped that up a little bit because usually I finish right on time without a minute to spare. But it looks like I'm a little bit early. So here's our website. You can find these, you can email me and ask questions, get information. But I am gonna be quiet for a change and stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Deanna.
All right, awesome. Wow. That was so much information, and I am thrilled to hear that from you. My head is just spinning with so much data, and I'm going to go look at it and download it and see how else this can be used. I love some of the stories that we can tease out from here. So from here, we do have a couple minutes. If anybody has a question, I do have one in the chat. Let's see. Oh, I think it's just a comment, but it says, thank you, Michael. We're making good progress on our risk factor study in Idaho, and your presentation has definitely informed how we will be communicating our findings and some of our study's limitations with our partners and the public. So thanks, Matt, for the comment there in the chat. If anyone has a question, please, you can raise your hand and unmute in our last minute or two, or you can post something in the chat. I think this data is awesome, Mike, and there's so much good stuff here that can really help drive your policies, drive your program, and even some of this information can be used to support changes that you want to make to your leaders and your oversight agencies. So I think that's fantastic. All right, still seeing no questions. I know a lot of folks, we are right up here near the end of the hour. I just wanted to say thank you again to Mike. Fabulous presentation. And I actually have a favor that I'm going to ask all of you. If any of you have some of the mom and pops, some of the small local businesses that would be interested in helping us pilot our small business survey that we're working on with the Retail Collaborative. I'm looking for a few interested single or smaller operators that have less than 20 outlets to take an electronic survey and give us some feedback. And please fill out your evaluations that we're going to be sending out to all those that attended the call today. We do use the information that you give us to help shape what the next 50-state network call is going to look like. So if you have topics that you want us to cover, please let us know in the evaluation. And if you need more information on any of the trainings that you saw today, you can email me, email Randy Young, or just find us at apto@apto.com or on our website. So we have all the links there for the trainings, and it's the bottom of the hour. So thank you all for your time today, and let us know if you have some additional questions for Mike, and we'll make sure to connect you. Have a great day.